Inspirational Creatives, episode 300.
I think I was holding a lot of space for uncertainty, doubt, and creative angst for a lot of clients. And it feels like it all came out for me in the writing process. When it just came to me sitting down to write, it felt so difficult. It just was hard to get the words out.
Welcome to Inspirational Creatives. I'm your host, Rob Lawrence. Join me every Friday as I chat with successful artists, producers, and creative entrepreneurs who share powerful stories and strategies. They can help you to create the life that you want. Listen each week as these inspirational creatives show you how to take your creativity to the next level. You'll learn how to create a sustainable business that inspires others and gives you the financial freedom and lifestyle that you want. Thanks for listening. Make sure you sign up at inspirationalcreatives.com to get free exclusive bonus material. And now, on with the show. Pam, a very warm welcome back to the Inspirational Creatives podcast, episode 300 and 7 years of this podcast. Of course, you're no stranger to this podcast as the guest of episode 3 way back in 2014 when this particular podcast began. We met some 12 years ago, I believe, at your Escape from Cubicle Nation workshop in London. And it was a talk that you then gave in Berlin back in 2014 that I think was a part of the initial inspiration for getting this podcast series off the ground. So I'm delighted to have you back on this very special episode to talk about your latest creation and new book. Of course, we've collaborated since then, and just a few years ago on your home turf in Arizona, and particularly at CARE, the Main Street Learning Labs, which I and my family have had the privilege of spending time with you at. And what an inspirational place it is. But I also know that's an important feature and core theme of your new book. It's an example that you use in your new book, which I can't wait to talk about today. But before we go there, I would love to start here, which is your new book opens with the importance of defining a clear, compelling mission that drives everything you do. So I'm keen to know, in the 12 years that I've known you, I'm sure that's evolved, Pam, but what's driven you to this point today, Pam, and what would you say your current mission is, and particularly with your new book?
Yeah, well, it's so wonderful to be back and have this long history. So I'm just reminiscing in so many of the ways that we connected, especially that London workshop. We could do a whole episode on following up or on where are they now. There were so many interesting people who were there. But, to me, a deeper mission and a deeper joy, I know in the work that I do and have done my entire life and career, has been on connecting people first with their truth and with their passion, and really with the joy of what creative work can be. I would often joke with my family and then with clients later on that, compared to my siblings who have very strong study habits and always finish their homework early. My brother was a valedictorian. My sister was always very timely and early with her assignments. I famously would scoot to the end right before the deadline. And if I didn't enjoy something, it was really hard. I made it very hard on myself to get it done because I don't have a natural discipline to just get work done. If I'm passionate about it, I will get completely wrapped up and enjoy it. So for me personally, I think my own journey with work, I would love for people to really find work like I have, that for the last 25 years of working for myself is so enjoyable. In later years, since becoming a parent and being so much more involved in our community and specific to the work that we're doing here at the Main Street Learning Lab, a way that I really want to be using my gifts and talents is to be highlighting and just making more visible the amazing entrepreneurs that are in the world, in particular for us here in Arizona, that based on my own family with my husband who's Navajo and a native business owner and many different connections there, to let people know of how many amazing leaders that we have for a lot of entrepreneurs of color, in particular native entrepreneurs who are doing great work, who just don't have the visibility that they should have, and that this means all kinds of shutdown opportunities for my children and nieces and nephews and so many extended, family and friends. So as happens a lot within our body of work, where at its root, I love to help people do work they love and create a thriving business. That always will be a thread that goes through my work. In particular, when I think of who I can personally work with, I love to be strengthening the businesses of those who have been historically marginalized, because there's so much gift talent and just really reparations that need to happen so we can really get the full benefit of everybody in the entrepreneurial world.
Yeah, absolutely, Pam. I mean, you only have to have a look at any recent business study and they will tell you that diversity and diversity within teams, within communities adds a richness. And curiously, they are the most successful businesses too, the ones that have
Yes.
diversity in a team. So, it makes sense to me. And I love how your own evolution has extended to that, in terms of it's not just about building a thriving business, but it's about this inclusion and this diversity and playing to those strengths there too. I guess you've begun to answer my next question, which is one I wanted to ask you, which is why the Widest Net and why now?
I have always had the experience. I tell folks that I'm really an author practitioner. I'm not just somebody who comes up with an idea and then writes a book about it. My work comes out of the work that I do with clients every day. And so in looking at this trilogy now of books, with the first one, Escape from Cubicle Nation, as you know, came out of 10 years worth of work being a management consultant. You and I have a shared background in doing consulting. I love the work, actually. I got so much value out of it, but I found so many people who wanted to leave and just didn't feel like they could leave, which became this interesting puzzle for me. And I recognized in doing that work that there was a huge shift in identity for people. There was a huge financial shift in people not wanting to just fall off the cliff financially when they made a decision to leave a very well-paid corporate job. So doing that work and really writing first my blog and then the book led me to understand there's specific things that we want to talk about the emotional journey of working for yourself and how you match it with the steps to build a strong and viable business. From that work, then, I found that with more and more people coming into the space, you and I saw this a lot. When I started my blog in 2005, there became more and more people writing about working for yourself and screw the man and, corporate life sucks. And I found there was what I felt to be an untrue perspective, which is that you can only be creative and free if you work for yourself. This is not true. There are many, many people who choose to work for an organization, association, corporate, many different entities. And what really matters is that we are creating a body of work that we personally feel is meaningful and that is contributing something significant to the world. So I really wrote body of work when I found I might be working with somebody, like I know you have, who might choose to quit and made a big deal, was very excited, told all their friends, started working for themselves and said, oh my goodness, what did I just do? This is a lot harder than I thought. I maybe am not cut out to be an entrepreneur, or maybe just not now. There are things that have happened where I want to go back maybe and work for an organization. And they felt shame because there was all this stuff coming out in the field from a lot of entrepreneurial enthusiasts that to me had a very limited way of looking at the world of work. So body of work was that framework that anybody could use from any work mode to understand, how do you create something that you're very proud to contribute to the world, that also leverages your gifts and strengths. So from that work and doing a lot of work with people on their IP, on their intellectual property, their body of work, then the question always became, I know what I want to do. I have a point of view. I have this book, this album, this, program, whatever it would be. Where do I find the people in order to buy it? Or for people that more had a movement, where can I find the people to be interested in this? And so that became a really deep exploration for me of trying to figure out what were some of these patterns that for me, I have done naturally as a community builder over my whole career. It's actually my degree in college was community development with a focus on non-formal education as a tool of social and economic change. So I had been thinking about such things for a really long time, but in this exploration and work with clients is where I began to really discover there is a method, and there is a method that can be very relational as opposed to some of the transactional business culture.
I want to get into your Widest Net method, and I'd love to talk to you about that. Before we do, let's talk about your writing method. And I'm interested to sort of pull back the curtain a little bit, because I know a lot of writers and aspiring authors are listening to this podcast, and I'm eager to know too how the writing process has been for you with this third book, and also how it compares, if it does compare, or how it differs to your previous writing experiences with your last two books.
I came to writing as a blogger. And so in discovering that, I actually discovered that I have really tremendous joy in writing an article, writing a blog post. When I get into writing it and I have a sense of what the topic is, I can be the kind of person who's sitting there laughing to myself, where everybody's like, what is she laughing at? Because I might crack myself up with some cheesy metaphor or whatever it would be. I really enjoy getting into the zone. When writing a book, from the first and subsequent times that I've done it, it really is a whole other experience, which intellectually for me and emotionally is more challenging. Just knowing exactly which stories to use and then how to tell something in a way that people can understand it, thinking about the structure of the book. Really, probably the biggest thing is just the thing that every publisher will ask you that you need to be presenting in a proposal if you go a traditionally published route is, what is this big idea and how is it juxtaposed with other ideas in the world? And so that part is one that I know brings a lot of angst to writers, including myself. And this one in particular was a long journey in both discovering really what was that big picture idea myself, and also finding a publisher that was interested in publishing it and who got it. That journey was one before I even put paper, put words to paper, that was really emotionally difficult. There were a lot of rejections. I had a lot of like shaking my fist in the air, feeling sorry for myself, where I was like, I know this is a thing. I literally, I get asked this question from every single client I work with. How can this not be a big idea? Part of what I discovered in that part of the journey of writing was it wasn't enough for me to deeply feel it. I had to have a way to describe it that connected with the business of publishing, where I had to choose to go down that route. And as a creative, that was a really important journey. I elicited the help of my friend David Moldauer, who used to be a senior editor at Portfolio, which was my first publisher, now Penguin Random House. They've gone through lots of acquisitions. And so I ended up hiring him to work with me on the proposal because I just was not finding a way to explain the ideas. Once we were able to go all the way through that process, that took a lot longer than I thought, and we got the deal with McGraw-Hill, of which I'm very appreciative of, the writing process was hard. I was surprised. am probably closer emotionally to this material as I've been for any of the others. I know why I want to write it. I'm naturally a community builder. I see a need in the market. On many levels, I'm so connected with it. But I think writing it during the pandemic, during quarantine, I had compared to so many people, relatively smooth experience. So the kids were home from school, but they're older, they're teenagers. So they didn't have a huge struggle. They didn't mind being at home. We actually like each other at home. So it was not a conflict to be in the same house for a long time. And so relative to other people, it was a good experience. And I had enough clients, which I'm very thankful for. I had enough consistent work to where my business wasn't disrupted. I think I was holding a lot of space for uncertainty, doubt, and creative angst for a lot of clients. And it feels like it all came out for me in the writing process. When it just came to me sitting down to write, it felt so difficult. It just was hard to get the words out. And honestly, I remember one day out of all the days that I wrote where I got in the flow for a couple of hours.
Wow.
And that was it.
Wow. That's incredible. When there's so much talk about flow.
That's the truth. That's the truth of this book.
And that's a surprise to me, Pam, because in my eyes, you're quite a prolific writer. I thoroughly, as you well know, enjoy your newsletters. I mean, they are small works of art in themselves, in my opinion. And I can tell you enjoy the writing process, but you are very good at it as well. And I would have expected, having 2 books under your belt, that this one would have come very easy to you. So I'm really surprised to hear that. But it's perhaps also reaffirming as well, because I did see in one of your recent newsletters, I remember you saying about if you've got a book in you, write it anyway.
Yes.
And you talked about that. Could you perhaps just talk a little bit more about that, and we'll get into some of the concepts from your new book?
Yeah, I have had such good advice from both past coaches like Mark Otto, who's a dear friend, who's a past client, but also has coached me on my own creative process, as well as writing coaches. And the people who I respect the most help to remind me that you cannot guarantee at all that it will be an enjoyable creative experience. By all means, do everything you can in order to help make that happen, by setting up a great environment and being passionate about what you're doing and drinking good coffee and all of those things. When you have big ideas or big things that you want to get done, we can't always guarantee it will be an easy emotional experience. Or like Mark Otto shared with me, I can get tripped up in looking to feel good before starting to write, as opposed to feeling really crappy, writing anyway, and then beginning to get into that feeling of, accomplishment, and then seeing writing that emerges that I actually enjoy pieces of, that I begin to work into a book. So that part of the experience, I think, was just really helpful. And it's a paradox, isn't it? Because part of what we do as creatives, and especially for those who have consciously decided to work for yourself, is to reclaim creative joy. I love creative joy. I love being in those moments of just being deeply immersed in something. What I don't ever expect from the work is that it will necessarily deliver me, the human, at that period of time in which I need to create an experience of total emotional joy. In this case, it was very challenging, and I was super committed to getting it done because I believe in this book, and I believe in the method, and I believe in myself, and I believe in my clients' stories that I featured in the book. The joy is actually coming now that it's done, because now I get to connect and share the stories of people in the book, and it's very, very gratifying. But I think we can really get ourselves in a twist if we expect the creative process while we're going through it to bring great joy. If it does, I am so happy for you. Like, if you feel that, there's nothing wrong with you. If you feel great creative joy, you don't have to be an angsty writer. But rarely have I had that long-term experience while writing things that require a lot more strategy and longer term vision, like a book.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying there is to give ourselves permission to feel whatever we feel, whatever that may be, tough or otherwise, or joy even, with something we believe in, something that we feel needs to be out there, putting something out there into the world. And fast forward to today, because the feelings must be fresh for you. The book is coming out this month, more or less.
Yes.
How does it feel now, Pam, that process is done and where you're at now, having gone through that?
It feels like a miracle. I tell you, for each one of the books, those who have written books before, something substantial, or created it on the music side or video, whatever your medium is, there is a part that truly is a mystery to me when I step back and look at it. Actually, just yesterday, at the time of our recording, I got the first hard copy version of the book. And it's a miracle to hold it in my hand and look at it and think, like, I actually did that. I remember how difficult it was, but I got enough words on a page to not totally turn off the editor and to really end up getting a book done and to tell some stories in there that I'm so excited about telling. So that part, and I really feel the same way about the other two books. It is very much akin to having children, where my kids will ask me sometimes details about, well, what was it like when we were really tiny and really little, or when you were pregnant? And I remember flashes of it, but I don't remember the whole thing. And it feels similar to the book. I just get to that point of being in awe, just like I am when I look at my kids, about the miracle of what I created.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that, Pam. Thank you so much for sharing your experience there. So let's talk about your new book. And more specifically, what I'd be very eager to talk about today with you, Pam, is your Widest Net method, and give our listeners an overview as to what that is so they can find out more from your book. But let's talk about perhaps how would you describe, just in a couple of sentences or so, what the widest net method is about, or the widest net?
In a couple sentences, it is a step-by-step process to build an audience or build a community that really centers your ideal customer. And it's a method that's really based on that nice slow food, as y'all Europeans will say sometimes, slow food method to building community, where it's like planting little seeds at a time, making connections with people so that you feel some ease in doing it. But it is done with great strategic focus, with good intent, and always done for the benefit of that client, customer, or whoever it is that you're trying to impact at the heart of everything that you do.
Yeah, great. So with that in mind, perhaps we could touch upon some, or if not all, of the four critical principles mentioned in your book. That really stood out for me when I began reading your book, and this sort of underlying concept or these fundamental themes or pieces. Could you talk to some of those for our listener, Pam?
Yeah, well, I think so. In the method, one way to think about it, and there is just a juxtaposition. If you think about it visually for a second, a lot of what we talk about in business is empire culture, so that you have the idea in mind, and we're taught a lot to build an empire. We literally say, like, I want to build my business empire. In that model, you usually are the empire. You are at the head, and you are just trying to pull everybody into your world. There's an element of domination. There's an element, right, of grandesse, of really building up your empire in your business, which then means you are lording over a large number of people. That metaphor is so different. The general metaphor for the widest net is where you have your ideal customer in the center, and our job is to really understand what is this natural ecosystem that surrounds that person based on whatever it is you're trying to help this person do. So if you're trying to help them solve a problem or achieve an aspiration, that there are other people, service providers, associations, media hubs, products, a lot of other people who are helping them to solve their problems. So in general, it's our job in the Widest Net method to be doing a great job at what we do to help them, and then to get to know the other players so that we help to stimulate and build this vibrant ecosystem around our ideal clients. That to me is just the perfect place to have all kinds of wonderful referrals and connections. And I never say it's easy, because we know anything strategic, like writing a book, takes time, but it actually becomes really enjoyable, where you begin to create this experience around you where, like, people and really smart people who are doing things to help your clients, and you can't wait to introduce them to someone else. It creates this whole vibe and dynamic that's very different than just feeling like I need to be positioning myself as the only one who has answers. So fundamentally, that's the visual that I'd like folks to think about, always centering their ideal client in the midst of this vibrant and thriving ecosystem. The book really has three main areas. The first part of it, the first few chapters, is really about you doing that internal reflection. Like, what are you about? What mission are you on? What are your values? Who is this ideal client? What are the kinds of offers that you want to create? And that really requires a lot of internal reflection. Then when you get to the mid part, which is really the heart of the method, is about understanding this ecosystem that surrounds your client. Who are other players who are involved? How can you really deeply understand who they are? And then to create something which I call a beacon in the book. A podcast is a wonderful example, as you so professionally and personally have shared over the years with your expertise in podcasts. You really want to create this shining light for your work so that people know the specific gifts that you have within this ecosystem. From there, that last part of the book is really about connecting, seeding opportunities. How can you develop a method in which your business operations really are focused around building up this connection with other ecosystem players? And I use a lot what I call the accordion principle, where when for a moment we begin to look out, and usually it's going from somebody saying, oh, wow, I'm a coach and I really want to build my business. I want to work with people who are on a journey to feel more creative and inspired. But, like, I have no idea where to find people. And then you go through a bit of an ecosystem analysis, and it goes from, I just don't know where to find people, to, oh my gosh, there are 100 places where I could find them, and people can feel overwhelmed. Then you want to go really narrow and say, of all those places, where might be a place where you can start to begin to connect. And so that to me is really where you have more of the method. We go into things like tiny marketing actions,
Yes.
specific little steps you can take each day, but without having the strategic framework at first in mind, then that's where sometimes people just feel lost because they're
Mm.
like, I've been spending all this time and I do LinkedIn posts and I do YouTube and I have a podcast sometimes and occasionally a newsletter. And they wonder why they're not really getting a lot of traction. And it's often because we haven't worked each part of the puzzle deliberately
Yeah.
before taking action.
That's great. There's so many points in there I'd love to come back to, Pam. One of them you mentioned there, I recognize, and this again was one of the lovely experiences for me reading your work here. It was one of those experiences that I had where you touched upon something that's talked about a lot, particularly in the business world, but also in the space of creativity and entrepreneurship, those making a living from doing what they love. And they talk about customer avatars and finding our perfect customer. And I love the way that you touched upon this in your book, because I felt the approach was quite a fresh one and I found it very inspirational. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about how describing your perfect customer in 2021, or perhaps we should be saying 2022 now, what does that look like for you today, from your point of view, in the context of all the other guidance that's out there about, defining our perfect customer and getting clear on that first?
I've been really influenced by my dear friend and colleague Susan Beyer from Audience Audit, who I reference in the book, and she was gracious enough to share some of her methodology in the book. She jokes with me that she never really wants to take the time to write an entire book. She'll just have her stuff featured in others, which I was very happy to do.
Good strategy, yeah.
But her expertise is in audience segmentation, and she's a researcher and does a lot of work with larger companies, brands, and marketing agencies. And one of the things that was so significant for me, because as I got to know her better, I began to work with her directly with clients. A lot of the advice that we're given, and frankly, that I gave for a long time before knowing any better, is to be describing our clients first in terms of demographics. So we might say, I love cool, creative people, and I'm really inspired as a 55-year-old, which I am, to work with younger people. So maybe I want to work with cool, creative younger people who live in New York and in London, because it can feel to me like I'm narrowing my niche in that way demographically. And that can be true. There are a lot of cool, creative younger people in New York and London. What's missing is really the heart of what we need in business is, but what particular problem or challenge are we trying to solve, or what aspiration are we helping people to reach? In my own experience, when I started Escape from Cubicle Nation, I had approached it with that perspective. So am I really positioning myself for this cool, creative folks who might be in these cities, without realizing that if I'm simply defining my audience as people who were unhappy in a corporate job, who had an idea for a business and were genuinely interested in leaving corporate to start a business, that definition could be a 21-year-old in their first year in corporate, or it could be a 74-year-old who had been in corporate their entire life and was then ready to make a change. And personally, their demographics could look completely different in terms of racial identity and sexual orientation and age, all of these different ways we segment. So that's a way, if you think about it first from that perspective, what ultimately are your customers trying to do? And then if it's relevant, of course, you can add demographics to that. That's something that really becomes more of a magical thing, and that really opens up a lot more audience possibilities than you would have thought of. Because I know in Escape from Cubicle Nation, it was astounding to me the people I met, a Pakistani software engineer, who lived in Pakistan, who had multiple businesses, and a Indonesian hip hop artist, basketball player, MBA student, and a 55-year-old, white gentleman who was a longtime, leader in a Fortune 500 company. And my content and my work resonated with all of these folks because of some of the specific problems that they were trying to solve. So that's really the approach at first. And there are a number of specific exercises in the book that can help people to really narrow down and define that in a very clear way.
Yeah, I love that, Pam. And one of the things I learned from your new book just on that, or building on that, is about nurturing your customer base. I particularly like the emphasis you gave to listening to your customers and really paying attention to what's going on in their world and what they're saying and what it is that they actually need. Could you talk a little bit about, adjusting appropriately over time, not just adjusting your ideal customer perhaps, but also your products and services that you offer for those customers and that cycle and that sort of process, I suppose, and that feedback loop. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, if we are approaching it that way and we're really centering those kinds of problems or challenges that we're helping people to solve, where that changes, where what we're actually doing with them changes, then we need to make adjustments in terms of the messages and in terms of the offerings. So I know in my own journey, in that really early stage work at Escape from Cubicle Nation, a lot of the programs that I created were targeted for folks who had never worked for themselves or just doing the basic kind of thing. How do you choose a business structure and get a website up and running and all of those things that are completely essential the first time that you're starting a business. But it's really related to the stage of business and it's related to the way in which you might want to be supporting them. So in my case, it was simplifying things, really having a concept and a framework that made sense to people that didn't take as much time because they were doing their business as a side hustle often to having a full-time corporate job. So all the offer design around that was really centered around what the problem they were trying to solve. Through later years, especially this last 5 years, I began to work with folks who had a different kind of a problem. They had been in business a long time. They had developed a really significant body of work, but they were at their personal limit to what they could actually support in their own service business. So they just couldn't get on any more planes to deliver workshops, or they knew that they needed to grow in a way to really scale their intellectual property beyond what they were personally able to do. So in this case, you can see it's quite a different situation as somebody who was just starting out, where they didn't have any visibility. They were just trying to find that right, product market fit. And so when the problem shifted in terms of who I was working with, that's where different offerings change. Now I do a lot of work around licensing and certification design, or working with people in order to really build the infrastructure for their business. So regardless of whatever it is that you have to offer, you can see that your offerings basically need to be directly tied to solving that problem or helping somebody to achieve the aspiration that they want to achieve. If you teach guitar or piano, you have in mind, what can I do in order to make learning this instrument, like where somebody can actually go through not knowing how to play the guitar to knowing fully how to play the guitar with confidence. And as you evaluate that transition, and in this case is more of an aspiration, how can you look at it critically and strategically to say, what have they tried before? What didn't work? What's a way I could make it really interesting and different? What's a way I could skip over steps that everybody has said you always have to take in order to learn how to play the guitar? But actually, we don't need to be doing that, and just really engineering a solution that's directly related to that, what I call the transformational journey that you're helping your client, your customer to make. So you can see where, if what happens for folks who have been in business for a while, where you might have your classes that you're offering, you don't, if you, without really looking at it, you might have the same offerings on your website, but then you recognize that you're actually talking about different things on social media. You might be beginning to work with people who you're really more interested. You're not really doing so much engagement on building new audiences for the things that you used to offer. And without looking at it strategically, you might just say, gosh, why isn't my stuff selling anymore? But when you step back and look at it, it often is because your audience has evolved and your offerings have not matched that strategic alignment.
Yeah. So it's about and thank you for that. I mean, that firmly answers the question I think I was trying to ask, which is that, how do you sync up the two between your own evolution and the evolution of those that you care about and your customers? And I suppose that kind of reminds me, or brings me back to the point, it's all about relationships in that sense. And it's all about, to use your words, being inclusive, respectful and valuable in those relationships, so that we can find out more about the people that we want to serve and that we already like working with and where they're going. I think with that in mind, I'm thinking now of some of the challenges that you address in the book, and what might be going through the minds of our listener, or through the mind of our listener right now. Unless you have multiple minds, let's not go into that conversation.
I know I do, depending on the day.
Yeah, well, yeah, true. I feel like that sometimes too. But I'm curious to know what your tips are, or what guidance you might give for our listener who is, on the one hand, looking to widen their focus, as you were alluding to there, but at the same time, focus their marketing efforts, because we know that good marketing is focused. And not broad, which is often where I've learned is the mistake of a mistake you can easily make, trying to please everybody with everything, sort of thing. So yeah, I'd be interested to know what sort of tips or guidance you have for somebody who's looking to widen their net, but also focus their marketing efforts.
It is a bit of a paradox and a play on words, which is intentional in some ways. The promise and the idea of the widest net, and it's a tiny tangent, but it's so interesting to me. I have a really clear sense always of really the feeling and the image for this book when I talk about the widest net is really being a huge supportive, more like a safety net that says, no matter what's happening with you, we got you. If you fall, you're not going to hurt yourself. There are all of us who are here to really support you in the journey. You can understand how the idea could be more like a fishing net. So I'm going to put out a wide net and then drag everybody into me. And it was funny in the early days of working with the cover design with some of the wonderful artists that designed the cover to the book. Those were some of those first images that came up. And I had to say, no. We're not talking about a net like I'm going to put a net out and drag everybody in.
Yeah.
I'm talking more about building a strong connected net where we know each other, we care about each other, and we don't let each other fall, and therefore creating this really wonderful space in which everybody can thrive. So that concept to me is really important to the book, and it's one of the fun things about having a little bit of a provocative title. Is some people, if you're just seeing it in the airport, are like, what are you talking about? Like, that's terrible marketing advice, the widest net. And so the idea really does come with this accordion principle, which is you I think, have to zoom out in order to strategically look at what are all the possibilities of where I could go. But then with discernment and with decision criteria, you say, of all the places where I could be connecting with new audiences, where is the place that would be most strategic and aligned, easiest, has the most depth, etc., with going in then narrow, which I argue as a business coach is something we should be doing about once a quarter to, first look at the big picture, evaluate all the possibilities, and then each quarter at a time have a specific plan. Saying, I know I could probably work with academic institutions and with associations, but for this next quarter, I'm just going to start to focus on developing relationships with other service providers that also serve my ideal clients. I call them peanut butter and jelly partners, right? PB&J partners. So people who offer a highly complementary but non-competitive service. In a quarter's time where you're really able to do those connections with other service providers, for some people they might find there's enough richness in this particular segment of my marketing plan that this could be enough. I could have enough clients to meet all my business goals and I don't actually need to go anywhere else. For other people, they could say, this is such a good strategic thing. Now I have some marketing operations in place and some members of my team to consistently follow up. Now let me dig in and let me work on building more of a relationship with media hubs that serve my ideal market so that I have more visibility. I'm featured more in the press as an expert and focus that way. So it's really this process of going big, looking at the opportunity, making a decision, making a specific plan, working the plan for 1 quarter, 2 quarters, whatever you need, and then zooming out again and saying, does it make sense? Should I go deeper? Are there other areas? because that to me is really where it makes a big difference. And so in that case, you're not just, when we think of just the widest net, meaning just market to everybody everywhere, that's really not what the model of the book is.
Yeah, you remind me there of one of the great feelings, I suppose, being coached by a really good coach is that opportunity to be able to zoom out and then zoom back in again and then zoom out and zoom back in again. And I really like the picture that you paint there, Pam, which reminds me that our marketing strategy doesn't have to be the same as our business goals. We can have a set of overarching business goals and then a marketing strategy for this quarter, which is in alignment with that, but you might have a different one for the next quarter. And I love that because I do see a lot of confusion. I've experienced it myself, where perhaps because it hasn't been clearly thought through, thinking about having a business strategy and a marketing strategy, because often they're sort of quite confused. And if you ask someone on the spot, they might be one and the same thing, although they're not, if you see what I mean. So I think having sort of a clear sort of separation between those two things, I can hear the power in that. And also reminded me of another part of your book which really stood out for me, which is on the sales and the marketing side of things. And again, I think for me, it reflects a relatively recent shift in attitudes towards sales and marketing, particularly in the sort of spaces and the communities that you and I occupy, Pam. I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit more about perhaps marketing and selling as entrepreneurs, but also as small business or small enterprise owners in a way that's aligned and valuable. Because you talked about that. You talk about this in your book. And one of the things that really stood out for me is how you do that in a way that feels aligned with who you are, but is also easy for your customer or your potential customer to engage in.
A lot of people, including myself earlier in my business journey, could feel really comfortable doing a lot of the marketing activities or community building activities of connecting with others and sharing work. And in the case of social media, maybe building a following. So you might have Instagram followers or podcast listeners or whatever your medium was. It can feel enjoyable and aligned for some people to do that part of it because it feels like it's, being generous, sharing, connecting, which feels good. Sometimes we have a false idea that when marketing stops, when you might have somebody who's uninterested in working with you, that all of a sudden you need to behave differently or execute a different set of principles that can feel very awkward. Some of that's the way that we've been sold to in the past because we have those expectations. Other times we might be using some outdated ways of looking at sales. I had really early in my management consulting career, a client, Skip Miller, who I mentioned in the book, who shared a particular perspective and had a sell that made so much sense to me. And I feel like solved a lot of the emotional angst of selling. And he would just say fundamentally, you should design your sales process to naturally follow the process that somebody goes through as a buyer. And it sounds so basic, but it is powerful because if we think about ourselves for anything that we want to purchase, so if we want to hire a coach, we're going to go through this initial process of just kind of having an interest, thinking about it, maybe talking to a couple friends, then maybe going to some websites and visiting, checking out people's information, watching their videos or reading their newsletter. Then we might actually go to the stage of interviewing, of having a call with somebody to figure out if they're a good fit. Then we might go through an internal process to really then clarify, well, what exactly am I looking for? How much money do I have to spend? If you're in a household where you make decisions about finances with a spouse or partner, you might want to check with it, or with your business partners. And then finally, you'll get to the stage where you make a decision, yes or no. That's the natural buying process. So when you as the business owner really match your sales process with where the buyer is to, first of all, not have to lay it on thick. If somebody's really early in the stage and they're just trying to connect and gather more information, you don't necessarily need to go down this hard sell because you might recognize that as you talk to them, they're early in their experience and they're not exactly sure what they want to do yet. So having that process really clear and then realizing, all right, they are going to get to a stage where they want to evaluate a decision. So why don't you create materials that make it really easy for them to understand? A description of your product offering, help support them by maybe some testimonials from past clients that have been really happy working with you in the past. explaining details of what it would be like if you're producing their podcast. Here's what you could expect. We go through this process. This is what you do. This is what I do. Like, these are the kinds of things that are naturally in their mind. So when you have these things designed in your sales process, it means you can relax, you can have access to what you need at any given time. I know for myself, and if I am going to be truthful, which I want to be, sometimes to this day, if I don't have a proposal template designed and I have some new opportunity that comes, I will put off actually submitting a proposal because I get too stuck in thinking about, well, how do I want to create the proposal and what should I have in it and what should the pricing be?
Yeah.
And then I look in the mirror and I'm like, what would you tell your clients every day? Like, I need to standardize if I'm going to be having conversations and talking to prospective clients about a project. I need to have it organized so that if they're interested and say yes, it's actually easy for me to make the process happen. I know I work with a lot of artists here just locally in the community with, jewelers and photographers and graphic designers and everything. And sometimes if people are earlier on in their journey, they haven't gone all the way through to just set up a business account and get their payment processor set. And so somebody might say, I'm really interested to buy this painting. And all of a sudden it becomes this really complex thing because they haven't put the infrastructure in place. So there's a mindset perspective of just knowing that your only job is to be supporting people with useful information to help them make a decision as they go through their buying process, and then to have your infrastructure clear so that it's easy for you if somebody says yes.
Yeah.
And that's when you know that, like, you don't have your systems in place, is where somebody says yes and you're like, oh no, like now I have to create this proposal from scratch.
Yeah.
And we laugh at ourselves, but we do it every day because sometimes you put off that piece.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. There's some familiarity there for me, Pam, but it's also, on the one hand, I'm jumping with joy, but I'm also crying tears when I know exactly what you're talking about when you've got a customer there ready to say yes. And it's often when it's a new bespoke or customized piece of work, you've got to give it some serious thinking time to get down what you've agreed or what you're working on in some kind of draft shape or form. And I know one of the things that you've taught me, Pam, is just keep communicating in those situations. So for anyone listening to this and experiencing that right now, I've found you can develop a lot more credibility by just keeping your customer in the loop, or your potential customer in the loop, rather than just going cold on them and leaving them in the dark, waiting for a proposal, but not hearing anything for days or weeks. So just let them know that you're working on it. And this has worked very well for me. I feel, and again, Pam, I'd attribute us working together as something that I've learned from you. I evolve my proposals now with my customers. It's a collaborative thing. I share the drafts with them and I said, have I captured this idea correctly with the one we were talking about the other day? And that keeps things in motion, I find. So it also reminds me of what you were talking about in terms of the tiny marketing actions. You mentioned those earlier, and I'm conscious that I know what you mean by that, but our listener might not know. And I know this is something I remember doing an online collaboration with you, a live collaboration a few years ago probably, where with a wonderful group of people, we were learning about TMAs, tiny marketing actions, and how we can bring those into our life. And they've become incredibly powerful for me. But perhaps you could just introduce our listener to the concept.
For sure. So as part of the seeding, when you think about earlier in the process where you have gotten clear about, what is this problem that you're solving? Who is your ideal customer? What are the places where they hang out in person or online, which I call watering holes? So that could be a LinkedIn group, or it could be they listen to a particular podcast where you want to get featured on that podcast, or it could be that they belong to a particular association where it would be really beneficial for you to go and meet one-to-many with customers that belong to that association. When you've done the analysis of knowing what those connections are, the principle of tiny marketing actions comes out of a lot of research around taking small steps with books like Atomic Habits by James Clear or Tiny Actions by BJ Fogg, where there really is behavioral research that shows we are much more likely to take action and be successful in habit change when we take tiny steps, as opposed to saying, this week I'm going to write 13 blog posts for the entire year, and I'm going to schedule them in advance. And I'm going to, I have learned that whenever I say that, maybe I can get 1/22 of that list done. Instead, where you develop a specific list, which some of the cases that I featured in the book were that worked with real clients that I worked with who were growing their business. It would be really specific. So they would say, I'm going to reach out to 3 peanut butter and jelly partners this week with an invitation to introduce myself and have a 15 or 20-minute Zoom call connection. That's it. Or I'm going to introduce myself to 3 journalists that are in these, write a column in a particular publication that I know is a good watering hole for my ideal customers. The idea is that you create a list of tiny marketing actions that you can do interchangeably. Some of it is based on what's fun and interesting to you, but that you take these actions consistently over time. I have learned, and it's really funny, one of my clients, Carly Cunningham, who I feature prominently in the book, my daughter Angie calls a lot of the main characters. So, like you can be a main character in your life, and they're the main characters in the book. Carly is one that was very wonderful and brave to have me share her story. When we started working together, it was just one of those weird convergence times in which she just had a bunch of work and did great work for her clients. They were very happy with the work, but she hadn't done a lot of seeding. So all of a sudden her prospects kind of dried up, and that can be a nerve-wracking time. And so I actually started this process of tiny marketing actions with her, and she tracked them very closely. The key is to do them consistently over a long period of time. And she has done some financial analysis since then, and she can specifically show that when she is consistently doing her tiny marketing actions consistently, she has more client prospects, her revenue is higher, there's a greater number of leads. So one of the things that we've discovered with Carly is just in the analysis of taking these tiny steps over time, they don't have to be perfect. You don't always have to have exactly the same number per week, but it makes a really big difference consistently in the performance of your business. And over time, it means that you're unlikely to have periods of drought for new prospects.
That's fabulous, Pam. It reminds me actually the importance of consistency there. And I know that's true certainly for podcasting, but also marketing generally. And again, that's something I've learned from you about. And I see this in my mind, you embody this as well. The importance of being consistent with your communications and with your marketing and I guess also that can benefit you too, because if you know what you need to be doing by when, or if you get into certain habits of delivering or these tiny marketing actions, if you find ones that work for you and you get into the consistent habit of doing that stuff day in, day out, then you're dropping all these seeds, to use your words there, with potential clients, with current clients regularly and in very small doses, but over time. And I too have experienced that so many times where, gosh, when I actually trace the thread back to this big piece of work that's now come my way, and when I follow that back all the way back to sort of see where it came from, actually it was lots of very small sort of interactions or experiences that then lined themselves up. It's easier to see looking backwards, I think, sometimes than clearly visualize how could this small action that I could take today lead to this huge, bigger work. But I see it time and time again, to your point there, Pam.
It's true. And I do want to say, for those who might be like me, not necessarily consistent in, I will produce my newsletter every other Wednesday for, years on end. I often laugh that I think sometimes people have a perception about my productivity that if they were to follow me around would be like shocked and dismayed, and maybe a little happy to know that it is not about always exactly having a timeline in which you get everything done exactly in the same schedule. Because as a naturally creative person who has a bit of chaos in the creative process, that I think the difference for me is that I do have a pretty clear sense over time about the kinds of connections that are really critically important for me to connect with. And for me, that tends to be people I'm working with, people who I have worked with in the past. If I think of just nurturing certain connections, that is something that I'm really consistent with. And sending a little note on Facebook, or just generally staying connected and friendly with folks that I've worked with before. And then where I think about maybe some longer term connections, it is okay if you are not wired in such a way in which you are a very like regimented person where you're always doing things according to a schedule. Because a lot of creative people I work with, including myself, actually have quite a bit of rebellion to that. And then if you try to force yourself to do that, then you can go in some shame spirals, as Brene Brown calls them, where you can begin to beat yourself up. And what I think you might miss is over time, you might recognize that you are creating consistency by committing to doing something over time, even if it's not in a perfect timeline. I've written my newsletter since 2004, actually, before starting my blog, Escape from Cubicle Nation in 2005. I started the newsletter in 2004. If we look back, we would not always see the same drop. There were a couple times when I was writing a book where I might not produce it for a couple of months. But since 2004, I have written consistently in a certain kind of format. And I think that could be part of that experience that you have is I do produce it, even though you're not necessarily watching the calendar. If you have the discipline and the focus like my brother and sister do to be producing things in a timeline, that is wonderful. Like that, it'll make your life so much easier, more power to you. If you're more wired like me, the big picture to keep in mind is, am I, when I do have these creative bursts and when I maybe look over a little bit longer period of time of 30 days or 45 days, have I shown up and planted some good consistent seeds? As opposed to having, a bunch of seed planting for a month and then just dropping off and doing none for 6 months. Those are the kinds of things that will eventually lead to the longer term problems in pipeline and just having new clients or customers.
Yeah, it's fascinating just reflecting on that, Pam, because you remind me there a term I picked up, which is to be consistently inconsistent. At least if you're showing up sort of now and then in the month, but consistently,
Yes.
then it's okay to be a bit inconsistent with that consistent. And to your point there, Pam, actually, if someone asked me, I would say you were very regular with your newsletters, but I couldn't actually tell you when I get them. I get them and I read them.
Sometimes Monday, sometimes at 9 a.m., sometimes at midnight. Like you notice they are not consistent in that way, but I have written for a long time.
I never spotted that. Yeah, it's amazing because it's the impression. That's the thing. And I think that actually the impression is formed more by, to your point there, your format. Yeah, that's the thing. I think if someone asked me, I couldn't say exactly when they drop, but yeah, Pam's really consistent with her newsletters. So that's great. So Pam, I'm very conscious of your time, and I'm incredibly grateful to have you on 300 episodes and have you on the podcast today. We're celebrating that. So there's one type of connection I'd love to ask you about before I just ask you a couple of closing questions that we haven't mentioned today, that again, I thought it was just a really refreshing insight, again, that your book talks about that I haven't seen elsewhere. And it's this concept of actually collaborating with other experts in some situations may be perceived as the competition. Could you just talk a little bit about that? Because I loved that, Pam.
Yes. When we think of the ecosystem surrounding our ideal client or customer, and you and I share that a lot, like we have people who we both worked with. I've referred clients to you to be working on their podcast, and you refer clients to me. You do coaching, right? As I do. A key when you think about really defining a vibrant ecosystem around your customer is it is based on shared values. It's not just anybody who's in that environment at all that has a product or a solution or something to give your client, but people who share values. Within that context, where there are other people who might offer the same kind of service, other business coaches. Like I have many people in my circle, and sometimes clients will say directly, I'm talking to you and I'm talking to Charlie Gilkey, my dear friend, who, he helps me. I work with him sometimes on his business. We work with clients because we know each other and we trust each other and we know each other's strengths and areas of focus. It can feel really good if I know that a client is talking to me and they're talking to Charlie. I know that either decision that they make, if it feels like it's a good fit for me, and for whatever reason they choose to not work with me, they would prefer to work with a male, or they might want to work with somebody who has a focus in productivity, whatever it would be, that they're going to be so well served by working with Charlie because ultimately what it is that I want is I want that person to have their problem solved. I want them to have success in their transformational journey. And that's the part where you know over time that there are other people who do a similar kind of focus as you. It does force each of you to get clear about how are you differentiated. Because if you find that you're offering exactly the same thing and you're not really making the case for how you're different, we all have gifts and strengths. And so that will force you to actually get more clear with your messaging. And I know Charlie and I, just as an example, will often say, okay, tell me, like, what are you doing lately? How do you want to be known? What kinds of projects do you want? What kinds of projects do you not want? This is our responsibility to be communicating with each other and saying, here's really the area that would be great, if you can refer business, or if you have an overflow, I have capacity right now and I can help you. This, I think, creates, first of all, a great example for our business folks where they think, oh, you mean you don't have to all be talking crap about each other and make the case why the other person is not good. I'm like, you are in
Yeah.
excellent hands whenever you work with Charlie. He is a great business coach. And I know he feels the same about me. And so in that case, you're really demonstrating that what we ultimately care about is you having your problem solved in a way that feels the most aligned and harmonious for you. And within that kind of feeling, and where we're sharing ideas with each other and we're, helping support each other to get more visibility, there always, I think, there are more available opportunities than any of us could actually really address in our own service business. For those that I think, like you and I, and Charlie probably the same, he has a little bit bigger team than I do, but I don't necessarily want to have a gigantic organization. So I have a comfortable kind of wingspan in terms of how much work that I want to do, and I can't do
Yeah.
anything beyond that. So it just, I
Yeah.
think, helps the entire sector, and it helps you to really get better at what you're doing in order to be somebody who your peers will refer clients to.
Yeah, we perhaps haven't touched upon it, but I guess one of the big challenges that comes with widening your net is that point where you get too much work that you don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And I've certainly experienced that before. And I think this was in one of Guy Kawasaki's books, actually. And I know he's a huge fan of your work, Pam. And I remember him saying, it's not about us all taking a piece of the pie. It's about making more pies.
Yes.
And in my experience too, working with people that my market might seem, in their eyes, at a first glance, might seem like my competition, actually, it's really helped me with capacity, and it's helped me with right fit, because some of the people that approach me, I think I would love to help you, but I just don't quite feel the alignment in terms of whatever it might be.
Yes.
And again, it's so nice to be able to refer. That feels great. And I don't mean just referral for the sake of some kind of kickback, just the joy of referring, knowing that you can help that person and help them travel a bit easier and get their solution met. In itself, a wonderful experience when you get to that point when those tiny marketing actions actually create an effect that or a new problem or a new challenge, which is that one of capacity.
Yes, it really does just get to the essence of what it feels like when you grow through time with your peers, and especially with your body of work that really creates this vibrant ecosystem, is each of you are growing, you're changing, you're working on new projects. And when you have this kind of collaboration that along the way, sometimes meaning referring somebody, else, or receiving work if they're too busy, it does create this feeling of connected purpose. And I think long term, that's the thing that we want. So when you have something like a book coming out or something you want to share, it's not even a consideration to often reach out to folks and say, hey, this is my new thing. They know your work, they've been working with you, and it makes it really easy for them to share with their audience.
I love that, Pam. So on that note, I would just love to just reflect quickly with you on your experience with the new book out and how that's resonating with your audience. I know you've involved a lot, myself included, your community and your audience with the putting together of this book. One of the questions I love to always ask my guests on the show is what are you most grateful for today? I'd love to extend that question to you, Pam, and ask you what you're grateful for now that the book is almost on the shelves. What are you feeling grateful for today?
I feel really, really grateful to the direct folks who were involved in the book. So my clients whose stories that I shared and people that I interviewed, just the vulnerability, I think, and sharing your story and knowing that it's being told by somebody else that potentially can go all over the world is a bit of a scary and vulnerable thing. So I'm really appreciative of that. And I think in particular, the community that we have here at the Main Street Learning Lab of just such a strong, vibrant community. And I just feel so much joy and appreciation and trust and that good family feeling that it makes me really proud. Just right before this podcast interview, I just got the hard copy of the book. So I ran a copy over to one of my partners here who does a lot of work in the neighborhoods and the community, who we've known each other for years, ever since we've had this space. And it just felt so good to share a copy of the book and to say, like, we're telling the story about what's happening here, and more people are going to know the good things happening. It's just like that feels really, really good to me. And of course, my own family is really included in that wonderful group of folks who were here at the Learning Lab.
Yeah, and for that story alone, I encourage our listener to go and check out your book, Pam, because it was fascinating for me. Somebody who's actually visited that wonderful space that you've got there. I hadn't deeply appreciated the history behind it and the thinking behind it. I'd got some sense of it, obviously, through your community and your newsletters. But when I read about the story and how it unfolded and all the rest of it in your book, deeply fascinating about you creating this space, but leaving it open to ideas and to collaboration in order to determine what that space should be used for. So without giving too much away, I urge our listener to go and check out your book just for that story alone. But of course, all of the other wonderful concepts and ideas that you've kindly shared with us today. So, of course, Pam, the obvious question for me to ask you is, where can our listener find your book and learn more about you, Pam? Because I recognize that this might be, the first episode that our listener has ever heard of Inspirational Creatives. And this might be the first time I can't believe it, but it might be the first time they've ever heard of Pamela Slim. So where can they find out more about you and the new book, Pam?
Yes, it's quite likely. That's the beautiful thing. We always are connecting with new people. Yeah. It's one of the joys of this work. You can find me at PamelaSlim.com. For this book is PamelaSlim.com/the Widest Net. Depending upon when the episode goes live, you'll find access to places you can buy the book. Generally, all places books are sold. And I also have links for a lot of the stories that I tell in the book. I have the businesses and the links for the people who were featured so that you can get to know their work more as well, because I'm really excited about sharing that. And then as we really grow and more people get the book, I'm sure we'll continue to add tools and resources and stories there. But PamelaSlim.com is really the best place.
That's lovely. Thank you, Pam. Just one final question. What's for you next? Now the book is done. What are you looking forward to the rest of 2021 and 2022?
What I'm excited about, as I was in some ways, like everybody, quarantine and just being in focus for this last few years in my work, I've really done a lot more hands-on deep work with one-on-one individuals, doing deeper work for building their business or scaling. And I think especially being called to this work and working in community, I'm working on some courses. One of the case studies I have in the book is Maven, which is a wonderful startup by my friend Wes Kao, who created Alt MBA with Seth Godin and is an amazing new startup of doing cohort-based courses. So I'm really excited to get back to doing what I have done lots of times in my business evolution, is doing one-to-many courses, having experiences where my amazing community can connect with each other, because whenever that happens, good things happen. More work exchanges, people share ideas. And so you'll see I'm developing a lot of the offerings in 2021 that'll be offered on a regular basis in 2022. And that'll be learning about how to create the Widest Net method, find your partners, and then also to take tiny marketing action. So I'm really excited about that. And then whenever it's safe to get out and about more than to actually physically go and visit some places. We do have a family trip to London and Scotland and Paris next year. And so given what is happening at that time with germs in the air, maybe we can find a way for those listeners in the London area to actually meet up in person. That would be really fun.
As always, thank you so much for your time. I'm incredibly grateful for you sharing your wisdom and expertise today and the details of your new book. So thank you so much for joining me on episode 300 of the Inspirational Creatives podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm very honored to be your 300th guest. And it's so wonderful to have this beautiful relationship over so many years.
Absolutely. Thanks, Pam. Thanks for listening. Nothing beats the stories and advice of an expert to help you raise your creative game. I would love to know what you thought about today's episode, so don't forget to subscribe in iTunes, where you can rate and review the show. If you like this episode, I invite you to share it on Facebook or Twitter with the one person you know who will benefit from the wisdom shared here today. You can find the show notes on inspirationalcreatives.com/podcast. If you have a burning question or a great idea for a guest, head on over to inspirationalcreatives.com/contact, where you can connect with me there.